We're about to begin the services for Mr. Aaron Klein. If any of you have a cellular phone, I would ask you to please turn it to the off position. Officiating our service today will be Rabbi Svi Engel of Congregation Oratora.
As is our custom, we open the service with the recitation of chapters from Tehillim. We'll ask Yoni Klein and Itchy Eisenberg kindly come forward. Yoni will read Tehillim, Parak Aleph, and Itchy will read Chaf Gimel.
Ashrei ish asher lo alach ba'atzas rishayim u'v'derech chatayim lo amad u'v'moshev leitzim lo yeshav ki im b'tzara Adonai chepso u'v'tzaraso yege yomam b'layla v'haya ke'etz shasul al page mayim asher piru yitain b'ito v'aleu lo yibol v'chol asher yasa yatzilach lo chen harsheim ki im kamotz asher tidfenu ruach Alkein lo yakumu rishayim b'mishpat v'chatayim ba'alas tzadikim ki yodei Adonai derech tzadikim b'derech rishayim toved.
Gimel. Mizmor David Adonai roi loch sar binafte sheyar b'tnei almei menuchs ina haleni nafshi yeshov yan cheni b'maglet tzedek l'man shmo gam keilech b'geit samavet lo yiraki atay madi shiv techa mishantecha hema yinachavuni ta'aroch lefanei sholchan neget z'roi die shanta v'shem nershi kosri v'yad Adonai achtel v'chesed yidufuni kol yimei chayai v'shavti v'es Adonai li'arich yamim.
We've gathered this morning to pay a kavod achron, to pay our respects to Aaron ben Tzvi David, Aaron Klein, of blessed memory. Grief is associated first with silence and shock. But already in the throes of that early stage, we try to bring language to the loss. And at the funeral particularly, the Talmud teaches us that we focus on the merits of the one who has left the world, that the funeral itself and the process of laying one to rest is what's called Yikar D'Shechva, for the honor of the deceased. There will be time to offer condolences and comfort, and that follows the Yikar D'Chaye in the time period of the Shiva and the grieving process that ensues. Gathered here this morning, family and friends of Aaron Klein. And we'll hear some words of tribute, words of eulogy, bringing some language to the loss. We'll hear from David Margulies and from Jordan Klein this morning for some Mila de Hespeda.
With a heavy heart, I'd like to share a few thoughts about my father-in-law, Aaron Klein. I think the main midah, or personality trait he had, was chen. It's very hard to translate this word, but I would say it's graceful charm. He put everyone around him at ease. Everyone who knew him would describe him as gentle and kind, something so simple. Yet in this contentious and non-civil world we live in, it's something so rare and so special. When you saw him in any room or any social setting, whether you were a child or an adult, my father-in-law was the guy you wanted to hang out with, and you knew you would feel comfortable with him. Dad, you were aptly named like your namesake Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the high priest. Like him, Dad was an Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom, one who loved peace and pursued peace. Our Aunt Eliza, Dad's sister-in-law, wrote to us this morning from Yerushalayim. Uncle Aaron always had a good word for everyone and a fantastic smile. He always offered to help others in the family at any time. I have an amazing story to illustrate this sense of trust and comfort that he created in those around him. My father-in-law for many years was the principal of a suburban Hebrew school. One day, a young child, not sure exactly how old, perhaps second or third grade, came into his office. When my shver asked him, "What can I do for you?" the child answered, "My toilet is broken." And Dad took him seriously and immediately called his parents and asked them if they knew where Joey was. They answered downstairs in the den playing Why Do You Ask? He informed them that Joey, on his own, walked out of his house and walked by himself a few blocks to the shul to speak to my father-in-law about the toilet problem. Why? Only because at the beginning of the school year, Dad said in his opening remarks to the young students, "You can come to me if you have any problem, and I will help you." Apparently, Dad was so sincere and conveyed such honesty and integrity that Joey took him at his word. As an aside, one usually thinks as the easygoing guy in the room as the one you might perhaps have a l'chaim with. Don't count on it. In close to the 35 years I knew my shver, I never once saw alcohol of any type cross his lips. Grape juice for kiddush every Shabbos. It's the one thing about him I could never understand. And I think my in-laws looked somewhat askance at me just for drinking wine at the Shabbos table. Dad had a great combination of traits in his personality. Even though he was the one who was always putting people at ease, it was a given that he was always the sharpest wit in the room. As many of you may well know, Dad was a 5-time champion on Jeopardy! You did not mess with Dad when it came to anything related to trivia. I was always the loser in the frequent and intense family trivia games. Dad, maybe I should start to drink grape juice like you instead of wine. My father-in-law was the clear patriarch of our family. Everyone looked up to him. He was our guidepost, and he gave all of us direction in all aspects of life. And he had a great sense of direction, and he was great at giving directions. You could ask him how to get anywhere. And this was all pre-Google Maps and Waze. Legendary story in our family of a random guy asking Dad in a pizza shop for directions to New York. And boy, he asked the right guy. Dad calmly gave him directions. Then you make a left and go 800 miles. You can't miss it. He was an amazing Zaidi, hands-on, taking the initiative with all of his grandchildren, getting on the floor to play with them. I know he will be a clear role model for me for how I need to engage with my own grandchildren. And I am in awe of the high standard he set for me. Pesach, he sat royally at the head of the Seder table, giving over the Masorah of our traditions. And like Chazal established for us the model of the 4 sons, Dad was able to teach everyone at the table according to their level of understanding with grace. I'm not a historian or a sociologist, but raising a Jewish family in the 60s and 70s was a tremendous challenge. Despite widespread assimilation, my father-in-law was able to maintain the Masorah in his family. He created a legacy that includes 11 grandchildren and 15 great-grandchildren, all with a strong Jewish identity and all receiving a solid Jewish education. He was a tremendous husband, and he and his wife Barbara, for 60 years, were an incredible team, providing love and support to the entire family. Since my beloved mother-in-law passed away about 1.5 years ago, Dad never really was the same. But there was something remarkable I saw when she passed away. When she passed, she was home, in her own bed, entirely surrounded by family. And although there certainly was sadness, there was also a sense of tranquility and peacefulness in the room. And if I weren't there myself to witness this, I may not have believed it. It was like a scene in a movie that was almost too pure to really be true. And it was something I was certain I would never witness again. But I was wrong. Yesterday, my father passed away at home, in his own bed, and completely surrounded by family with an aura of love and tranquility. What a tremendous couple for both of them to be escorted into the Olam Shel Emes, the world of truth, in such a regal manner. Dad, we will always miss you and will always be in our hearts. Please forgive me for not giving you the full covenant honor that you truly deserve. It was such a blessing to be your son-in-law. Hey, nafsho tzurot b'tzurah hachayim. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life.
It is a huge task to try to summarize the life of my father Aaron Ben Yehudis, and what he meant to his family and others who knew him in one hesped and one eulogy. Of course, I have known my father my entire life, and I always appreciated the family time we spent together when I was a child and the many things he taught me as I was growing up. But as I matured to adulthood and gained some perspective that comes with age, and as I became a husband, father, and grandfather, I began to truly appreciate the example that my father set for me. My father was the go-to person in the family. Whatever help we needed, advice we needed, we all turned to my father. And he was a very hands-on person. He was very involved in a good way in the lives of his children and grandchildren. He spent time with us. He listened to us. When we needed help, tutoring, a ride to the airport, or something more serious, he did not just point us in the right direction, he acted upon it. He talked us through it. He drove us there. He bought for us what we needed. He made calls and found us the right person to solve whatever issue was troubling us. Dad had a number of interests that kept him young and sharp and, when needed, entertained. He was a terrific athlete. In my case, that talent skipped a generation. My father played baseball and softball, usually playing shortstop, until middle age and beyond. When one of my sisters or I met someone who knew him in high school, among other things, they would usually comment about what a great ball player he was. He was once invited by a talent scout for the Philadelphia Phillies minor league team to attend spring training camp to see if he might have a future in baseball, but he turned it down because it would have required traveling and playing on Shabbos. He was also a big White Sox fan and enjoyed rooting for the Bears as well. As my brother-in-law David mentioned, Dad was, and the whole family by extension, had to become big trivia buffs. Asking trivia questions was a regular part of most Klein family gatherings, and Dad was always the one who asked the questions, even though he knew more answers than anyone else. Many of the people here probably remember, and David mentioned it, that in 1995, my father was the Jeopardy Senior Tournament champion, and he participated in the Tournament of Champions. He blamed his less than successful time at the Tournament of Champions on those youngsters being able to press the buzzer faster than the senior, although I did occasionally remind him he was only 60 years old at the time. Dad loved to play poker with his friends, and frankly, anyone who was willing to play poker with Dad. Dad was also very competitive, but in a good way. It was never about making the other person feel bad. It was about both of them having fun and building a bond. What set Dad apart, however, was not his varied interests, but who he was as a person. Dad was one of the smartest people I knew, and he did not just have smarts, he had a keen insight. You had to get up very early in the morning to put something over on my dad, and even then, good luck to you. Dad had a quick and disarming wit. It was kind of a punny dad joke sense of humor, but with a smart and often unexpected twist. Many of his children and grandchildren inherited his sense of humor, but in each case, just a partial version of it. None of us seems to have the complete recipe. Dad loved Judaism. He was the educational director for an afternoon Hebrew school at 3 different synagogues spanning over 40 years. He taught Judaism to generations of public school children who might otherwise have had a very tenuous or no connection to their faith. Dad could not resist a good gematria, or even a not-so-good gematria. Also, as David mentioned as well, until more recent years, Dad and Mom hosted Pesach Sedarim, which were attended by children and grandchildren, and often by my aunt, my uncle, and cousins. To this day, those who attended still talk fondly of those Sedarim. He spent time preparing every year so that he had fresh new insights to discuss at the Seder. He taught us the importance of mitzvahs and gemilot chasadim, and he set us on the path. And Baruch Hashem, there is much Torah being learned and mitzvahs being performed by the family that he and Mom created and nurtured. Another thing we learned from my father was strength in the face of adversity. couple of years ago, my niece Zahava put together a tribute video for my father's birthday, which included her asking his children and grandchildren and their spouses questions about Zadie. One question she asked was, what is his biggest fear? My nephew Ryan, then 11 or 12 years old, answered that he does not think Zadie, my father, is afraid of anything. The interesting thing is that in more recent years, it became clear that my father did have anxieties, maybe even slightly more than average. But as children and even as young adults, we had no idea. That's because my father, worries or not, fought anxiety with strength. This strength manifested itself in many areas of my father's life, one of which was his struggle with his most recent illness. By the time my father was diagnosed with the dreaded neuroendocrine cancer, he was pretty near death and in a lot of pain. He was asked a number of times by one of his treating physicians if it was not just best to manage the pain and not seek treatment. But my father still had a lot to live for. So he opted for chemotherapy, notwithstanding the pain. Baruch Hashem, the chemotherapy gave him months of life and quality of life that he would not otherwise have had. But recently, the chemotherapy stopped working. Rather than give up, he opted for another type of treatment. Even during his hospitalization last week, which resulted in a tube being inserted into his kidney and a bag hanging from his back, he kept asking when his next treatment would be scheduled. It took great strength for him to choose life and to fight for it. But then, just this past Sunday, he was told that the cancer had come back so quickly and so strong that there were no viable treatment options remaining. And then again, it took great strength for him to accept and to deal with his impending death. He signed documents and took steps to get his affairs in order right up until the day before he passed so that it would be easier for us to deal with those affairs after his passing. My parents have had a wonderful, supportive, and unfortunately shrinking close group of friends, the Mussmans, the Bernsteins, the Seppens, Monica Bauman. My mother had her mahjong friends, my father had his poker buddies, and many others too numerous to mention over the years. Dad had his interest and his hobbies, and Dad had his work, and while those were important to him, what was most important to him was family. My father's parents, Zadie Harry and Bubby Rose, and I call them Zadie and Bubby, but I actually don't know what they would have been called because they passed many years ago. I was named for my Bubby Rose. My sister Stacy was named for my Zadie Harry. In fact, my father was still in his 20s when he lost both his father and his mother. Another challenge and another example of my father's perseverance. My father's two siblings, my Uncle Jerry and my Aunt Doreen, each passed many years ago in his or her 50s. My Uncle Jerry made Aliyah in the 1960s, and he and my father only saw each other once after that and before my uncle passed in 1987. It wasn't as easy to travel back and forth then. But my parents and my sisters and I and our children became particularly close to Uncle Jerry's family, to Aunt Eliza and her children and grandchildren, once my father's grandchildren started learning in and moving to Israel. I also remember that my father and my mother very often helped my Aunt Doreen financially and otherwise, giving her money, buying groceries, household items, even when my parents did not have a lot of means themselves. My parents were also very close with my mother's sisters and their families, my Aunt Estelle and Uncle Maury and their children, and my Aunt Toby and Uncle Shelley and their children. My Aunt Toby and Uncle Shelley moved to New York many years ago, and so most of our summer family vacations were to New York, or at least involved a stop in New York. We did not mind because we always had a good time. After my mom's passing, Aunt Toby and Uncle Shelley and my cousins, Sari, Bruce, and David, spoke to my dad often, and as did Scott and Denise as well, Aunt Toby and Uncle Shelley's children, checking to see how he was, and when needed, for Uncle Shelley to give my father medical advice. Even though he would not want me to do so, I need to say a word about my cousin David Slivnick. David, in addition to being my parents' nephew, was my father's unofficial oncologist. I know that I speak for my sisters as well when I say that there are no words to describe the care, love, expertise, and professionalism with which David treated not just my father, but the entire family during his health ordeal. He was always available. He knew just what to say and to advise, in particular during Dad's illness, where in the end he deteriorated so fast. David gave us just the right amount of hope while preparing us for the inevitable. Dad loved, I'll emphasize it again, loved his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they had an incredible role model in Dad. From the moment they could make sounds, they were all drawn to him. My mother would occasionally comment, half in jest, that if she wanted quality time with the grandchildren, she would have to get it when my father was not present, because when he was there, they were all drawn to him. He was their Zadie. Dad never tired of hearing about their exploits, great and small, seeing pictures and videos, reveling in their accomplishments, and sharing simchas with them. From the time each was born, he had a special tune he used to sing the grandchild's name, and to my recollection, each had their own unique tune. While he loved all of his grandchildren equally and completely, he and his youngest grandchild, Ryan, had a particularly special bond. They saw each other every day. They went to lunch, just the two of them, usually once per week. And Dad helped Ryan in his Limudei Kodesh. They learned together. Dad's grandchildren, Tali, Avigail, Shay, Shira, Akiva, Yoni, Ayelet, Dovi, Zahava, Meira, and Ryan, and their wonderful spouses all loved Dad very much, and he loved them at least that much. Also, most but not all, given COVID and geographic considerations, of Dad's great-grandchildren, Ovadia, Michal, Gaili, Hananya, Yael, Chayakela, Tzipora, Chili, Baruch Aryeh, Nechama, Adina, Dasi, Kayla, Adele, and Shmuel Eliezer had the zechus to know him, even if for so brief a time. Dad loved my sisters, Stacy and Elena, and me completely and unconditionally, and he loved our spouses, David, Sue, and Rob, as if they were his own children. He was always there with support, encouragement, and if we wanted it, good advice. He was our dad. He took care of us, comforted us, loved us, taught us about life, gave generously of his time, efforts, and attention, and so much more. He taught us what it is to be a family and to always hold on to that, even if tempers flared occasionally. I only hope that we were able to give back to him a fraction of what he gave to us. Acharon Chaviv, Dad loved. Dad loved, respected, and cherished my mother. And my mother loved, respected, and cherished Dad. They taught us how to build and hold on to a loving and long relationship. They knew the perfect balance of sharing everything and yet having their own interests and giving each other a bit of space to pursue and enjoy them. And Dad was the most tender, patient, attention caregiver to my mother during her illnesses, including, of course, the last, while still at the same time keeping his role as the rock on which the whole family could rely. Again, Dad was a hands-on person. He did not hire caregivers. He did not delegate tasks to us, although we certainly helped. He felt it was his responsibility to take care of my mother, and he did so directly. We tried to use Dad's hands-on example in caring for him during his last illness. We managed to take care of Dad directly, even early on in his illness, when literally, for at least a couple of weeks, someone had to be rubbing his back 24 hours a day because of the pain. And that connection, I need to make some comments about my sisters and brothers-in-law. Stacy and David made Aliyah last October, only to put their lives on hold and come back a few weeks later and live in my basement for 7 weeks so they could be here to help take care of Dad. When the treatment was working and he was managing well, they went back to set up their lives in Israel. They moved into their new apartment in Ramat Beit Shemesh on a Sunday just to get on a plane again a few days later with essentially an open-ended ticket to come back and help take care of Dad during the final stage of his illness. Dad was a soup lover, and over the course of his illness, I think Stacy must have made hundreds and hundreds of bowls of homemade soup, which were a great comfort to my father. I don't even know how to begin to describe what my sister Elena and my brother-in-law Rob did for our father. Back in November, they moved into a small condo with their son Ryan and their dog to take care of Dad. Rob took a leave of absence from work and took just about every night shift in the beginning, staying up all night to rub Dad's back and to help him with bathroom issues. Elena was on call just about 24 hours a day, feeding Dad and tending to his needs, and more than once being on the receiving end of his rare bad moods because he was in such pain. And Elena and Rob did it with care and love and without complaint. Their lives revolved around everything and anything that Dad needed for the past many months. Every time I would suggest hiring caregivers to help out and to give them some respite, they always responded that no, we're not there yet, we can still take care of it, and they did. May Dad's memory, example, and legacy be a blessing for his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, for his other family and friends, and for Klal Yisrael, and may HaKadosh Baruch Hu comfort us in our loss.
I was not really zoche to know Aaron Klein personally too well. We interacted at Simchas and fortunately sometimes in moments of bereavement. Aaron Klein was born on the 29th day of August in 1935. He was a West Sider. He grew up there. He attended public school, and then he was a graduate of what was then known as the Chicago Jewish Academy. He drafted into the U.S. Army, didn't serve overseas, but more locally. But he pursued a career in the service of another kind. As beloved son-in-law and son each described in their Hespedim, as a Hebrew school principal at North Shore Congregation Israel in Glencoe, at Northwest Suburban Congregation in Morton Grove, in North Suburban Synagogue, Bethel, and Highland Park. Last night I was chatting with Ryan, and he went running for a beautiful plaque that he had in his room where the Board of Jewish Education was giving what I would consider to be a medal. It was a plaque thanking Aaron Klein for distinguished service of generations of young people, as was mentioned, raised in a path to have an exposure to Torah, to mitzvahs, but I would submit also to be exposed to him and to his values and to his warmth and his wit and his care and his great powers of empathy. This week, all around the world, we'll be reading from the Sefer Torah, from Parshat Kedoshim. Rashi tells us, Rov Gufei Torah Tluyin Ba. The main elements of Torah are contained within it. It was actually initially recited apparently in front of everyone in a situation of hakel, of assembly. So many were the important categories, topic headers, that themselves could be branched out in order to explicate all of the mitzvahs. In fact, according to some, so-called 10 Commandments, the Aseret Dibrot, the 10 statements from Har Sinai, were here being reformulated in sequential order and could be teased out from the early psukim. Here's one of them. B'pnei seva takum, v'hadarta pnei zaken, v'eretem lokecha ani Hashem. You should rise before someone who is aged, and you should show a certain element of respect for the one who is a zaken, an elder. And one should fear God, for I am God, as the Torah says. Rashi writes, Ein zaken ela shekana chochma. Who is an elder? Someone who acquired wisdom over time. This acquisition of wisdom, the Ramban quotes from the Gemara in Kiddushin, refers to one who acquires knowledge based on a verse, a pasuk from the book of Mishlei. Rabbi Yossi Aglili teaches, Ein zaken ela shekana chochma, one who has acquired wisdom. Shenamar Hashem kanani reshit darko. God, as it were, acquired wisdom at the beginning of his way in creating the world. Whereas Moshe Rabbeinu writes to us in one of the 11 chapters that he authored in the book of Tehillim, Limnot Yameinu Kein Hodav and Avi Levav Chochma, teach us to number our days so that we will acquire a heart of wisdom. As was said, Aaron Klein was known to be, in colloquial terminology, a trivia buff. But that's really, in my view, the low-end language edition of what was going on. He was a person who was constantly amassing knowledge and who found a way to play even with the acquisition of knowledge and to bring other people into that play. The key here is not the play for its own sake, but to forge connections with others. As was described, the word chen, a disarming capability to bring people closer, an affability. Sue described him as, in one word, punny. And Zahav and Shoshana said, the clever wit, they brought up his humor, and were looking around the house at how many trivia books there were. The aforementioned Jeopardy tournament and times that he won. But the real prize was actually in connecting with other people. Connection with his beloved wife, Barbara, Zichrono Livracha, connecting with his children, his grandchildren, his circle of friends, playing bridge, playing card games, playing sports, softball, golf, even the competitive spirit that was mentioned, where his beloved brother, Zichrono Livracha, was, along with everyone else in the family, a Cubs fan. He was going to be a Sox fan, just to keep things interesting. But the idea of this, of course, is the idea of connecting with other people. Even just last night, sitting, chatting with Ryan, just before he showed me the beautiful plaque, mentioned euchre and Israeli poker and regular poker. I don't know the difference between those two. But he threw in a line. He said it was always lighthearted. And his dad and his grandfather get together with others to play. And speaking of playing, just last fall, Aaron Ben Svi David, Aaron Klein, was still playing baseball with his grandson and his grandson's friends, just in the field, not too far from the condo, near the old house. And some of Ryan's friends were actually remarking, wow, your grandpa is really, really well for his age. Direct quote. He can run really fast, throwing out pitches, teaching you to play ball. Tried to ask Ryan, do you remember the moment when he taught you? He said, no, I just picked up a bat, and then he started. Zadie was pitching. And to think about what that means, the acquisition over time, the amassment of knowledge, but also especially of connections. Connections to generations, not just generations past and the generation of the moment, but also to transmit that to future generations. I want to share with you one image that also, Ryan, it was a great conversation we had last night for quite some time. We were chatting, and Yelad and Itchy joined us, and he mentioned that at some point, maybe it was just this past fall, I'm not sure, Zadie saw you running, Ryan, and he came to run alongside you, and he said, okay, it's a race now. Grandson and grandfather running together in the great race, the great relay race of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people. When we gathered a few, not so long ago, in fact, when Barbara, Zichrono Livracha, left the world, I went back and checked my notes. So at that time, there were 11 great-grandchildren. Kenai Nahara, now there are, according to the card here, 15. And Jordan was saying the names. It sounded like there might be 16. I probably heard wrong. But Baruch Hashem, 11 grandchildren, and now 15 great-grandchildren. Ki od nimshach shalshalet. The chain continues. And we think about his memory in future years. Part of the legacy is, of course, the games, the playing, the sense of service and commitment. Part of it is also more formal moments of instruction. Elena mentioned last night that she remembers her father saying to her, don't react, act. And what he meant by this, she explained it to me, is essentially follow your own moral compass. Don't look at what others are doing and choose how to behave. That you should know how to behave. And family members spoke, and those who reflected last night talked about some aspects of this legacy. Particularly, the Seder came up in some of the discussions and was mentioned today. Soon, it will be Shabbos again. And on Shabbos, it's a time when we take stock and we don't work. We play. We connect with others. We figure out who we are again and renew that connection. And when Shabbat begins this Friday night, once again the Kiddush will be recited. And I asked last night, direct question, to my new friend Ryan, who's my daughter's classmate at Hillel Torah, North Suburban Day School. Do you ever hear your grandfather say Kiddush? He chuckled. Every Friday night. Every Friday night. So this Friday night, Ryan, God willing, you'll say the Kiddush. Maybe Mama help you start you off the first few words or something. But you can do it. Your grandfather showed you how. He threw out the pitches. He ran with you. He taught you a lot. Not just in the sporting department, but of course having a good time, going to delicious meals weekly, navy bean soup, lentil soup, till you discovered hamburgers, Ryan, you described to me last night. But it's a connection, again and again. I hope you'll feel that connection again, ongoing, even in this moment of loss. Another one of the psukim in our parsha, Ish imo v'aviv tiro, v'et shabtotai tishmor ani Hashem Elokeichem. The Torah intertwines and interweaves the reverence for parents and the observance of Shabbat. Chazal have many ideas about what this means, about how to show reverence for parents in their lifetime and even posthumously. How to keep Shabbat, there are formal elements. But I sometimes wonder if the memories that are forged over a lifetime of being able to spend a Shabbat together and a Yom Tov together are not that which endures and comes back to us each time in our lives, even after our parents have left the world. Ish imo v'aviv tirau v'et shabtotai tishmoru ani Hashem Elokeichem. The idea here that the reverence for parents, as was described today by son-in-law and son representing the family, is something that endures, particularly when they are a dugma ishit, such a great role model, as was Aaron ben Tzvi David. And Amir Tzah Hashem and the many Shabbatot that are kept moving forward in this illustrious family, where, as I recall from last we gathered, a point was made that the grandchildren, all of them, are Shomrei Torah Mitzvot. They respect the Shabbos, they respect parents, they understand the connections intergenerationally. And I owe such a great debt of gratitude to the beloved grandparents, among them the grandparents Aaron and Barbara Klein, Zichronam Livracha. Condolences are extended to each of the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, those who are here in person and those who are watching via live stream. And condolences to Jordan and Sue, to Elena and Rob, and Stacy and David. Tehei nishmato shel Aaron ben Tzvi David, Tzura b'tzorachayim. May the soul of Aaron ben Tzvi David be Yehudit, be bound in the bond of everlasting life. Umacha Hashem Elokim dima me'al kol panim. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu wipe the tear from every face. V'cherpat amo yasir, and remove the shame of the nation. Please rise now as we recite the memorial prayer, the Kalmale. El Malei Rachamim Sochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei HaShechina B'Mahalot Kedoshim U'Tehorim Kezorakia Mazirim Et Nishmat Aaron Ben Tzvi David Shehalach Le'olamo Ba'avur she'anach nitpalalim be'ad eskarat nishmato began Eden tehei menuchato lachein balarachamim yastireu b'sertek nafav le'olamim v'itzror b'itzrachem et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al miskavo v'nomar amen. Please be seated.
This concludes our service here in the chapel. The interment will take place immediately at Waldheim Jewish Cemetery in Forest Park. Following the interment, the family will be sitting Shiva at the Klein residence, 4330 Suffield Court. That's in Skokie. Shacharis will be at 7 a.m. Mincha Maariv will be at 7:40 p.m. There'll be no visitation from 12 until 2 p.m., nor from 5 p.m. until 6:30 p.m. Visitation will end at 9:30. Those who wish to make contributions could be made to the American Cancer Society. For those of you who are online on the live stream, you'll be able to see this on our website. For those of you who are present, it's on your folder. The American Cancer Society or the ARC, those addresses and the e-contacts are on the folder. For those of you who are going in procession with the family today to the cemetery, please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker. The sticker should be placed in the front passenger side of your windshield. We would also ask that you have your bright headlights and hazard lights on at all times. For an additional measure of safety, our staff will be placing magnetic flags on a number of the vehicles that will be in the procession. As we drive in procession today, please drive as closely as safety permits to the vehicles in front of you at all times. We want to avoid any large spaces or gaps, particularly as we go through the intersections. I'd ask you to please be very thoughtful about utilization of your cellular phone also. The following individuals have been asked to serve as pallbearers. I'm going to ask everyone to please rise. I'm going to ask David Margulies, Rob Angus, Yoni Klein, Itchy Eisenberg, Billy London, and Ryan Angus to please come forward. At this time, we are going to escort Mr. Klein, Rabbi Engel, and the family from the chapel. Friends, our service